So the first question we've got to think about is what's more important? Is it more important that we progress, or is it more important that we get perfection? And maybe there's not a clear-cut answer, because progress focuses on the moving forward. I like to think of this like the frontline soldiers in a battle. They push forward, they conquer new territory. And perfection is focused on the different area. It's focused on the land that's already conquered, cleaning up anything that the frontliners have left unfinished, maintaining the peace. So if the frontliners soldiers go too fast, then they can become encircled, and so the control of the territory hasn't been maintained, so the enemy can come up behind them. So to have a true victory, you need to be conquering and also maintaining. So both have a place. So students thrive when they feel like they are progressing. And when it feels easy, they thrive. When practice is fun, they thrive. When they know what the goal is or the reason for what they're practicing is, they thrive. And when they feel they have some control over their learning. And I don't necessarily mean by that they pick all their own repertoire, although some people would use that sort of approach, but more that they control their speed of learning. They have the ability to work faster and work ahead because they know what's coming up, rather than, oh, I'm not sure what's next, so what do I do? But if they know what that order is, then they can take some control. So they feel like they've got control. They're more likely to be involved in this process. I'm going to keep coming back to the battle image throughout today. So now, one important thing about fast progress, and it doesn't always seem logical, beware of skipping over foundational skills. We have to beware of the fast learner. The fast learner is great. It's like that frontline soldier. And I'm learning so quickly, I'm conquering new territory. But how are we going to make sure that the peace is maintained behind, and what's behind the soldier is still okay? So bad technique in the early days that's not corrected is going to become a headache in later levels. It can slow progress down. If we go, oh yeah, I'll fix that later, then we end up with a problem later on that maybe this is now a really bad habit that we can't deal with. So students, they seem, particularly in the early days when things are easier, here's a semi-brief, here's a C, they seem to be assimilating information quickly. But the problem is, of course, if they learn it quickly, the things they've learned before also fall out of their memory quickly. Memories that stay for a long time and memories that have been rehearsed over and over and over again, which is why as people get older and the ones that get dementia, the memories they've thought about the most are the ones that last the longest, and often why they remember their childhood memories more than their recent memories. So, and with technique, it's in these early days we set the body in place. So if we allow bad technique or we allow bad posture, because they're starting out and so much to think about, that's going to become their habit. And they're going to have to fix it later. I'm not exactly saying that the technique has to be right in the first lesson, because there is a time period where we're learning the muscle placements and the muscle skills. But I'm addressing where it's not addressed at all, because we can gradually address it. And I think over a 6-month period, there's some research that says that 6 months is how long it takes to set a habit as far as muscle memory goes. So there's this period where we're refining that technique, but I think it needs to start very early, because when I'm examining grade 5s who are really struggling to put their fingers in the right hand shape, they're also struggling to get quavers even, and they're struggling in so many other ways, which is related to the fact that they didn't get that posture right, and it's still not right. And it can often cause them to have to stop learning. And it can be traumatic to have to relearn technique all over again rather than getting it right in the beginning. So the reason I've got the image of the pyramid there is to show how important the foundation is. The better we build the foundation, the more easily we can reach the top of the pyramid. But if we try and build the pyramid in reverse, where the point is what's at the ground, then it's very hard to balance the higher grades, and it can tip. This can happen if we cover the early lessons too quickly. We end up in the higher grades, but they're too hard for the student to handle. They topple or they quit, or they get depressed and they think they're not talented. The issue isn't not talent at all. It's just that they didn't have the foundation. So going back to a battle image, the importance of review is the importance of keeping what's behind the front lines at peace. And the mother tongue method was a tenet of Suzuki's method. Dr. Suzuki realized that at school, kids become dropouts. They start school and they can't learn and they're failing things. But he noticed that all children successfully learn their mother language. So there's something wrong with the way things are taught at school if it creates failures. And that is how the Suzuki method came about. It was these thoughts about, well, why is school producing failures? But there aren't failures with language learning. All children are learning, even the most complex dialects. So it's a thinking about how can we apply the way a child successfully learns a language to other subjects and other learning. And so you think of with learning your mother tongue or your first language, the parents repeat the words over and over, and the kids hear the words over and over. And there's no time in our lives where we don't hear the word mama. We hear others saying it, we say it to our kids, we say it to our grandkids. Basically, we continue practicing and reviewing this word. And because we use it constantly, we remember it. And similar when we learn a second language, you know, we can't keep that second language at its peak unless we're practicing it. You know, when I moved cities, I moved from Sydney, and in Sydney I had lots of Asian friends and I got to speak Chinese all the time. But when I moved here, I didn't have any Asian friends. I had no one to speak to. I mean, in Mandarin, had lots of other friends, new friends. And to be truthful, how many Chinese people are in the room? 我玩了很多. I forgot everything. But, you know, only a few years ago, I could converse reasonably well. And so it doesn't take long to forget if you're not doing review. And so the same with music. If we're, you know, so the question is, how can we ensure that our students review techniques enough that they don't lose them? And for this, I have this concept of keep up pieces. So in the Suzuki method, the idea was that you start at the beginning of the book and you keep reviewing the old pieces. So depending on how we teach, whether or not we're using a book where every piece is important or we're using a book where there's a whole heap of pieces that are really just practicing some other skill, we can select pieces that cover the key skills. This one is going to be a keep up piece. Keep reviewing this one. And then maybe the next three are not so important. But then here's another one, keep reviewing it. So they get a collection of pieces that they keep reviewing. And that collection is where they should memorize them. These are the pieces that they get so confident with that we can fix the things like the technique, like the posture. And because they're free to focus on those aspects of those pieces. So obviously, when we're picking keep up pieces, we want pieces that are interesting. We don't want the first piece in John Thompson, which was 4 middle C's in a row. It's boring. But that doesn't mean you can't learn that piece. But a keep up piece might be, if you were losing John Thompson, it's a long time since I've looked at it, but say Mary Had a Little Lamb might be one of them. And so you can pick some through that are more interesting that the kids like playing and say, these are the keep up pieces that we're going to keep to work on technique. Keep up pieces are practiced daily because just like with language, the words that we use daily are the words we remember. We want the skills that are being learned to be practiced daily. As I just said on the previous slide, because I forgot about this slide, is we use these pieces to work on technique and musicality. If a student can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star really well, we can start thinking, well, how can we shape the phrase? Oh, can we do a little ritardando here? Can we do some dynamic changes? Oh, can we focus on our finger shape? So this is where this keep up piece idea works really well. And so you can clean up what's behind the front line. Oh, look, I even wrote notes for myself. So really, I can't emphasize enough the benefits of continually reviewing. You know, when we did exams when I was a kid, so did your exams and you forgot the pieces. Almost as soon as you've done the exam. So when we keep a piece up, we're also keeping up the skills we learnt in it. So yes, we've memorized the piece, but we've also memorized those skills. We've memorized those sensations. We've memorized those hands. We've been able to work on things like balance of hands. We can think about whether the tone is the most beautiful resonant tone or whether it's a bit harsh because we're free to listen to that And to be able to do that, we need to know the piece well enough. If it's a piece we've just note crunched or just learnt the notes, we can't focus on all those details. So as parents and teachers, our job then becomes, how can we make review fun? Review is not, oh, just play over it and don't think about it. That's actually detrimental. The piece will start deteriorating. And students do love getting more polished with their pieces, but it has to not be mindless repetition, always focused on improvement. So maybe in our practice today, we're going to review the pieces with mother watching the beautiful hand shapes, or maybe mother's watching the straight back, or maybe listening for the balance of the hands, or maybe listening for the tone. And maybe tomorrow we'll listen for the louds and softs. So it doesn't need to be the same thing, but it's focusing. Another option is to pick a different thing. This piece, we're going to focus on handshake. This piece, we're going to focus on louds and softs. So that each piece has a different review focus, but all the time we're thinking, how can we improve our technique? There are pieces that won't be keep up pieces. I call them throwaway pieces. In particular, pieces that are for practicing note reading. Students do need to practice note reading daily. So if we're only doing keep up pieces and we're not trying to be the soldiers at the front line, then we also get the problem that the students' reading won't develop, their memory, their ear might develop, but that we also need reading. So we don't want the reading to deteriorate either. So in just looking at becoming a stronger reader, in my opinion, learning an instrument is very complicated. Kids have to multitask right from the beginning. Posture, oral, geography of the keyboard, names of the notes, the sounds of the notes, the sounds of the intervals, and so on. In other teaching, we try and teach, and other subjects, we try and teach one step at a time. And I think that this is the same, this should be the same with music. For instance, if I go back to review, we don't want to ask the student to focus on 10 different aspects of technique when they're reviewing that piece in today's practice. It can be one, because we can focus on one, but it's very hard to focus on 10 simultaneously. So the same with note reading. I think that note reading is most easily taught away from the instrument first. While they're still working on posture, they're still working on technique, they're still working on ear development. They can do theory, they can use note reading apps. There's a few of those available on the phones. They can use flashcards, they can play games. So you can become really strong readers without having to worry about doing that while playing the instrument. Actually, I often see students with very bad technique because they've been reading and they're so glued to the page that they can't focus on what's going on in the rest of their body. So I think keeping those skills separate for a while until the reading is easy. And once it's easy, uniting it's not a big stage. So so if we break down what the steps to becoming a good reader are, step one would be to become quick at recognizing the notes on the stage. And I notice a lot of beginner books start with here's 5 notes on the stage and look at the ups and downs, but that's not recognizing the notes. I think they should be able to recognize one note and know what it is by what it looks like. There is research, a fair bit of research that suggests some of the mnemonics that are common, like every good boy deserves, they're not actually beneficial long-term for becoming good readers. But on the other hand, the way that notation was originally developed, which was to find the G, because it's a G clef, if you look at it very closely, is actually just a calligraphy G. If you find the G and count up or down to your notes, like G, A, B, C, or G, F, E, D the other way, that is much quicker and long-term at becoming quick readers. And it's probably to do, for those who have looked at memory at all, in the number of syllables involved when you do something like every good word. So if you're adding syllables to the words, which actually makes it take up more space in the memory. So one thing I like to do, and I started thinking about this when I was thinking, how do kids learn to read English? Is I like to describe what the note looks like. Well, D, for instance, is below all the lines. And so if they get this picture, well, I know what D looks like because it's below all the lines. Similar to we know that what A is like because it's a circle and a stick in handwriting. Now, step 2. So first, step 1 is actually recognizing the notes when you see them one note at a time. But step 2 is to just start decoding the music. This is not the same as sight reading. I think decoding music is taking the time, not worrying about the rhythm, taking the time to make sure each note is actually read correctly. And then over time, decoding becomes quicker. And once they're starting to learn pieces quickly because they're decoding quickly, now is a good time to bring in sight reading. If we try and bring in sight reading too early, we lead to kids becoming anxious because they're, oh my goodness, I've got to think about this, I've got to think about this. And sight reading is multitasking. It's hands, fingers, geography, keyboard, notes, rhythm. That's an awful lot of multitasking, very stressed if each step in that process is not already mastered separately. So that's why I don't talk about sight reading until we're quick readers. But quick reading and strong reading is so important for fast progress. So it's worth spending the time drilling it and practicing it, but doing it in the right order, not trying to skip to, oh, we can sight read now, but get each step of the process strong. And then sight reading is just a logical progression after that. And then oral development, and these are not in any particular order, because oral development is so important. That the eye is the dominant sense between the eye and the ear. So when a child learns their language, they hear first. And if we introduce the eye before the ear, particularly at the instrument, then the eye will dominate. And so there's lots of noise. That's my heater. I won't get cold if I turn it off. Sorry about that. Thanks for notifying me. And that distracted me. What was I talking about? Oh yeah. So if we teach the eye first and we don't teach the ear actually won't develop quite as well. We start with the ear, and I haven't found it's detrimental to bring the reading away from the instrument. But if we start with the ear, then the ear helps the eye learn to read, and it doesn't lose that ability. So same with language, we speak, then we read. So, and we can start oral development at the first lesson. There's many ways. The Kodai approach that many of us are familiar with was very much focused on oral development. Singing encourages oral development, using hands to represent the up and down pitch, singing a note, and then saying to the student, can you find that note on your instrument? Or playing the note and asking them to find it on their instrument by its sound. I usually in the beginning restrict that to 5 notes so that they've only got a few notes to pick from. I'm going to play one of these 5 notes, see if you can find it. And then singing the next note. So you might be learning a song. So I found one note, now let's sing the next note. And so then they try and find that next note. And what they're actually learning is they're learning what an interval sounds like. And then clapping the beat. So there's lots of activities we can do to develop oral while they're learning pieces and also as a separate activity. And, you know, there's a famous quote. It's Joseph, I think it's Joseph Levine, the pedagogue from the early 1900s. And he said that learning to listen is one of the most important skills a musician will ever learn. And I'll add to that and say, because it's playing by ear in the initial stages is harder than playing by notation. But once they've learnt to play by ear, it opens up a whole wealth of music. And both skills, both playing by notation and playing by ear, are equally important. Students like to be in the driver's seat. If they feel in control of their progress, then that gives them a sense of empowerment. And what I mean by that is if I give my students 3 pieces and scales and an exam date, they're not really in control of it. They can't learn faster because the exam date is November when the examiners come out. They can't learn slower because the exam date is in November. So they have they can't have any say over what's going on. And if there's no point in them practicing harder because they're not going to be able to get to the next level faster. So having what I call an avert curriculum, or a curriculum where they know what comes next. So, you know, I have design books in the same philosophy as the Suzuki method, but I use different pieces because I wanted to combine them with the exam method. So the students will get to the end of the book and then they're ready to do grade 3 and they've learned appropriate pieces for the grade 3 exam. But an avert curriculum means they start at the beginning of the book and they work through. And they know what comes next. They know they can look ahead at home because they know what's coming. And that gives them this power because oh, I want to learn faster, I'm going to learn more pieces. But if they feel like they're being given random sheet music, oh, you've learned this piece, now here's this piece. Oh, now you've learned that one, now this piece. They don't have that control, even though, of course, that doesn't mean the curriculum is bad. It just means that they don't have the ability to see what's coming up ahead. And so in their mind, it's harder for them to see it as progress. But if they see themselves working through a book, it can give them that sense that, oh, I can see that I'm getting this far. This is how much far I've got to go, and so forth. Listening to the tapes. I use the word tapes because I actually still use tapes. CDs, whatever the equipment is. And I want to discuss this because I think that listening to the recordings is one of the key elements of fast progress. So listening to them, whether it's tapes, CDs, records, the Spotify playlist, MP3, or whatever the newest thing is, this is one of the most valuable things a student can do. And I say listen, I don't mean listen once. I mean listen daily, just like we learn language, listening to it daily. And these recordings can be in the background while we're doing other tasks. If I'm going to learn some music, and I say I picked this piece I'm going to learn, I'll find 10 different recordings, all different interpretations of it. I'll put it on one tape. I put it in the kitchen when I'm doing the dishes, it's just playing. And I get to hearing, oh, that's what that person does with that section. And I get all sorts of different ideas that I wouldn't get on my own, just thinking by myself. And sometimes that synthesis of ideas can generate new ideas that on my own I wouldn't have come up with. In the early days, of course, they don't need to compare recordings. If we give them a really good model, this is like learning a language, having a really good model with a really good accent, then we will learn that good accent from them. Same with the recordings. If the kids are hearing recordings that are played well, they are going to catch those good things from the recording accidentally. So, listening does all these things. It teaches oral skills. It teaches them the songs that are coming up, so they get to like them. The same as with food. Kids, they say that kids need to see a food 6 times before they're willing to try it. Similar with the piece. The more times they hear it, it becomes familiar and it becomes part of their language, and they get enthused about wanting to learn it. It helps them memorize the music. Often, if they've heard the CD or tape enough, they've actually memorized the piece before they come to the instrument. It helps them learn to love future repertoire. It teaches them musical phrasing. It teaches them a sense of pulse. It teaches them a sense of momentum, and it can even teach them piece structure. And it teaches them, and I'll go back and say, even if the parent does not play an instrument themselves, one of the best things, and one of the reasons why people often say music is genetic, is if I'm playing music, my kids hear it. They hear me playing with good rhythm. They hear me playing with good phrasing. They pick up on that because that's our language. If I play along with them, then I can help them keep the pulse and the momentum. And in the olden days, if you had a student who had poor rhythm, you played duets with them because that would force them to fix their rhythm. And so but this is what a CD can do, even if as parents we're not musical. And I would just say that it's not that you're not musical, you just didn't have that opportunity to develop those skills. But the CD can do that in your place. The CD teaches them about tone quality. So if they're playing the flute and they've got this horrible raspy tone, that becomes their normal. They hear this is the normal tone. Their brain recognizes that as normal. And so then it becomes hard to fix. But if they're hearing this model with a really pure tone, then they hear their own tone and go, my tone's not pure. And so they're able to then correct and aim for the model. And also, it brings the language and music into the everyday environment. It makes it not foreign. And a whole heap of harmonic elements just become part of the everyday vernacular, so to speak. And listening to the recordings can fix wrong notes because they play a wrong note. They hear it as a wrong note. And they're like, that's wrong. I need to fix it. And it can help them with reading. And that sounds a little bit, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know if that's maybe someone else in the chat can answer. Sorry, if I hold my microphone here, am I banging my microphone? I don't know. So the microphone, what if I unplug the microphone? Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah. Is it working? Yeah, great. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so you know that listening to recordings can help learning to read music. And that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but when they first start reading music at the instrument and they play a wrong note, they recognize it as a wrong note. So, oh, well, I misread that. That's not a B, it must be an A. And so they can actually self-correct when they're misreading. And a student who listens is going to progress faster than a student who doesn't. So actually, of all the things I've said about fast progress, listening to the tapes is probably the most important. Another thing about fast progress is about building patterns. The way our memories work is that the short-term memory can hold 7 plus or minus 2 things. And so, but if those things are just individual notes, A, B, C, D, then that's all we can hold. But if we have these patterns, and they get called chunks, patterns can be used, and then we can have 7 patterns in our head, in our short-term memory, rather than 7 individual notes. So if we start early naming and identifying patterns, whether that's chords by their names or scale patterns or modes or whole tone scales, or I have this thing called triangles. So where if you were to join the note head dots like C, D, E, D, C, and then join across the bottom makes a triangle. So they can be identified, broken chords can be identified, our birdie bass, things like F goes up or G goes, sorry, what I've written there, F goes down and G goes up. So they're joining things together in these little chunks as soon as they can. And then that makes life easier when they're learning stuff down the track. So why memorize? I mentioned previously about the importance of memorizing key part pieces, because when we memorize, we're not just memorizing the piece. We're memorizing the patterns in the piece. We're memorizing how our body feels, so the posture. We're memorizing the sensation of a relaxed technique. We're memorizing the techniques themselves, whether that's staccato or legato or ornamentation or embellishment. All of that's being memorized. We're memorizing how to phrase musically, and it frees the mind to focus on other details when playing. I want to make clear that what I am not saying is I'm not saying you should perform on stage by memory or you should perform in an exam by memory, because an exam on stage is so different. Anxiety and other factors come into play when we're in a live performance. So I don't think that is essential. I know that a lot of people do insist on memorization in performance. I personally don't, because I suffer terrible anxiety on stage and in the exam room. And I'd much rather not be anxious and play well. But the memory I'm talking about is when learning. So it's memorized. Now you're performing, use the book, don't use the book, I don't mind. But it's memorized so that you've memorized all these aspects of the piece. And once they're memorized, they can be accessed in future pieces down the track. If they're not memorized, they get lost and they don't stay to be accessed later. So practice. That's probably one of the most important things. Along with listening to tapes, this is probably the next. And how we practice matters. So time-wise, it takes on average, according to research, 1,500 hours of practice to get from the beginning to grade 8. So if you practice 5 hours a day, you could achieve that in a year, or 5 minutes a day, and you might get to grade 8 by the time you're 120. Practice should include some sort of warm-up. That might be scales. I refer to scales as warm-ups. It might be technical exercises, but something that is to help the fingers get ready. And then review pieces, which we've mentioned before. Polish them, refine them. Don't play through them mindlessly. Use the review pieces in order to improve. And then there's the new pieces, the conquering the new territory. And to practice them, don't just practice from beginning to end. Practice in sections, practice slowly, practice with concentration, practice hands separately, separate parts if there's multiple parts. Practice doesn't make perfect. Actually, practicing something wrong makes you very good at practicing it wrong. You can get very good at making mistakes, but perfect practice does make perfect. So I often say, practice as slow as you need to so that you can play it perfectly. Because if it's really slow, it doesn't matter. It will get faster if you always play it correctly. If you always play it wrong, like you're driving a car and crashing into the wall repeatedly, then the piece is not going to get better. You're just going to get very good at crashing into the wall. So obviously I wrote my own books that would correspond with the exam. So the student could work through this curriculum and then get to the end of the book and be able to do an exam at the end of the book. But you don't need to write your own book to do this. Actually, since we are the ABRSM forum, we can use an ABRSM book or an AMEB book, or Trinity, if there's Trinity people here as well. We can use these books and use them in a way that still allows a student to learn this way. So we can grab the book. And so if I've got the ABRSM book, I'll tell the student, we're going to learn all the pieces. And so actually some of the instruments I teach, I haven't written a book for. So I do use the ABRSM book like this. And I'll say, we're going to learn all the pieces in the book. And then when we get to the end of the book, we'll be able to pick 3 pieces out of it to do for the exam, the 3 best ones. So listen to the official recordings daily. The ABRSM provides official recordings. And then I ask the students to memorize every piece and to get it to an 80% standard. And I actually have a reward system in place for the first time they get the piece to 80% note perfect by memory for me. And then once it's got to that 80% level, it becomes a review piece, which we continue to perfect while we're learning future pieces in the book. And we keep reviewing the old pieces while we're learning the new ones. We focus on technique, posture, musicality on those pieces that have already reached this 80%. Did I talk about 80% somewhere? No, on the next page. And there must be more down here. Yep. I've never used PowerPoint the way I'm using it today, so it's a little bit new to me. But never to worry, I'll get there. And then work on theory. Often theory gets delegated to this side, but theory is so important for helping quick progress because it works on the notes, it works on knowing scales, knowing patterns. And so they see those patterns in the music that they've been working on in theory. So it's really helpful to help them progress well. So progress or perfection for fast progress. And this is where this 80% rule comes in. And I seem to be contradicting myself a little bit. I keep talking about review when the goal of the topic is how to progress faster. But I feel like progression and perfection go hand in hand. Without a reasonable level of perfection, progress is hard and slow and disheartening. Progress needs to be fast enough that the student can catch the momentum and the enthusiasm and enjoy learning. But the quality of their playing needs to be high enough that this progress is easy and something that's within their grasp. And this is where the 80% rule comes in. So research tells us that 80% is the ideal mark. 80% means that the material is learned well enough that learning has occurred, but it also means that you haven't stopped progressing in order to progress. So researchers say that that difference between 80% and 100% isn't actually worth the time cost benefit. So if it takes 7 extra hours practice to get from 80 to 100, where at 80 the level of perfection is sufficient that they can move on to the next level and be competent and able to handle that next level easily. So and I just want to make very clear, when I say 80%, I'm not talking about a face-to-face exam. I'm talking about the standard of the pieces before going in and before moving on. Face-to-face exams are unpredictable. Anything can happen in there. And no matter what mark a student gets in a face-to-face exam, then that doesn't reflect who they are. They could have gone in and got cold feet, or the piano was sticky, or the air conditioner was the wrong temperature, or the examiner's pen was really loud, or they heard cars outside and they weren't used to hearing it. They could do better than they usually do in the exam because the adrenaline kicks in and those students are annoying, right? But either way, it doesn't matter what mark they get in a face-to-face exam. What matters is what level they are before they get in. Are they at a suitable level that when they go to the next grade, it is not going to be hard? Recorded exams in this way I like, because we know, oh yes, this is an 80% level, we can send it off. But so we have a lot more control with recorded exams. And I've talked about recorded exams a lot because they're so good for students being able to have that power to choose their speed of progress. But I just wanted to clarify with the 80%. So aiming for 80% gives the progress perfection balance, and to be able to progress fast without falling in a heap because the skills aren't there. But face-to-face exam marks do not reflect necessarily the student's ability. So that's where the teacher has to make a good judgment on how to interpret the face-to-face exam marks. So in summary, how to progress faster: practice, listen to recordings daily, develop oral ability, develop reading abilities, learn to identify patterns, memorize everything, review old pieces, get pieces to at least 80% before moving on. And remember that in a battle, you need those on the front line and those bringing up the rear. Don't try and take shortcuts, because shortcuts will always fail. Build a solid foundation, and then the higher levels will be achieved quicker and easier. And that actually, I don't know how long it took because I can't see the time, but that is the end of the slideshow. So what I'll do is I'll go offline. I'll end the live stream. And if anyone has any questions or wants to add anything, you will be free to talk and not be live streaming. So how do I end live stream? Stop live stream.